Dr. Samuel Morrison's hands trembled as he held the envelope. 60 years had passed since he last saw the handwriting, those careful loops and precise curves that belonged to only one person in the world. The letter had arrived that morning, forwarded 3 times from his old addresses, finally catching up with him in his small Oakland apartment where he'd lived alone since Martha passed. He set it down on the kitchen table, unable to open it just yet. Outside his window, the city hummed with its usual rhythm. Children laughed in the playground across the street, their joy a sharp contrast to the storm building in his chest. The envelope sat there like a time bomb, threatening to detonate the carefully constructed peace he'd built over decades. Samuel was 82 now, his hair white as fresh snow, his dark skin creased with the stories of a long life. His hands, once steady enough to perform the most delicate surgeries, now shook with age and something else. Something he'd buried so deep he'd almost convinced himself it was gone. But memory has a way of refusing to die. He made himself a cup of coffee, black and strong, the way he'd learned to drink it during those endless nights in medical school when being one of 3 black students meant working twice as hard for half the recognition. The familiar bitterness steadied him. He sat back down, picked up the envelope, and finally tore it open. The letter inside was brief, just 3 sentences that made his world tilt on its axis. They're tearing down Mercy Hospital next month. I thought you should know. There's something still buried there that belongs to you. It was signed simply, Thomas. Samuel's coffee cup slipped from his fingers, shattering on the linoleum floor. Brown liquid spread across the white tiles like blood, like the blood that had spread across the operating room floor that night in 1965, the night everything changed, the night he made a choice that had haunted him ever since. Welcome back to our channel. Your participation has made our journey here very interesting. Before we continue with the story, please support our channel by subscribing, clicking the like button, and turning on notifications. Please leave a comment and suggest other video topics you would like us to work on. Thank you for your support. Now, let's get back to the story. Mercy Hospital. The name alone was enough to make his breath catch. He hadn't thought about that place in years. Had trained himself not to. Mercy Hospital, where he'd done his residency, where he'd learned what it meant to be a black doctor in a white world, where he'd witnessed miracles and horrors in equal measure, where he'd buried secrets that were never meant to see daylight. And now they were tearing it down. Samuel stood on shaking legs and walked to his bedroom closet. In the back, behind the winter coats he rarely needed in California, was a box he hadn't opened in decades. His fingers found by memory, pulled it out, set it on the bed. Inside were the remnants of another life. His medical school diploma from Howard University, photographs of colleagues long dead, newspaper clippings yellowed with age. And at the bottom, wrapped in cloth, was what he'd been looking for. A journal. His journal from those years at Mercy. He unwrapped it slowly, reverently, as if it might crumble to dust at his touch. The leather cover was worn smooth, the pages thick with his handwriting. He hadn't looked at it since the day he'd packed it away, the day he'd left Mississippi for good, swearing never to return. But the past, he was learning, doesn't stay buried just because you want it to. Samuel opened the journal to a random page. His younger self's handwriting stared back at him, urgent and angry. August 12, 1964. They brought in another one today. 17 years old, beaten so badly his own mother didn't recognize him. Dr. Whitmore wouldn't let me operate, said the colored residents weren't ready for trauma cases. I had to stand there and watch while he fumbled through a procedure I could have done in my sleep. The boy died at 3:47 a.m. His name was Marcus. He wanted to be a teacher. The rage came flooding back, hot and immediate, as if 60 years had collapsed into nothing. Samuel had to close the journal, had to breathe, had to remind himself that he was an old man now, that those battles were fought and lost and won in ways he couldn't have imagined back then. But some wounds never heal. They just learn to hide better. His phone rang, startling him. The number was unknown, but something made him answer. Dr. Morrison? The voice was young, female, uncertain. Speaking. My name is Angela Davis. No, not that Angela Davis, she added quickly, a hint of humor in her voice despite her obvious nervousness. "I'm a reporter with the Mississippi Observer. I'm doing a story on Mercy Hospital before it's demolished, and your name came up in some old records. I was hoping I could interview you." Samuel's first instinct was to hang up. His second was to say no and never think about this again. But instead, he heard himself ask, "What records?" "Patient records, mostly, from the 1960s. There's been some interest in the hospital's history, particularly its role during the civil rights era. Your name appears quite frequently in the files, Dr. Morrison. You seem to have treated a lot of people that other doctors wouldn't." The weight of those words settled over him. Yes, he had treated them. The freedom riders, the protesters, the activists who'd been beaten and broken for daring to believe that black lives mattered, that black people deserved to be treated as human beings. He'd stitched them up in supply closets and basement storage rooms, wherever Dr. Whitmore and the white staff wouldn't find him. He'd saved lives that weren't supposed to be saved. "Dr. Morrison, are you still there?" "I'm here." His voice sounded old even to himself. "Miss Davis, what else did those records say?" There was a pause. Then, "That's what I want to talk to you about. There are gaps, you see, entire sections that have been redacted or are missing altogether. And there's one file in particular, from September 1965, that's been sealed. But your name is on it, along with two others, Dr. Thomas Garrett and a nurse named Ruth Johnson." Samuel's heart stopped. Ruth. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 60 years. "Dr. Morrison, the file is labeled Confidential Investigation, Patient Unknown. According to hospital records, something happened that night that was serious enough to warrant a full inquiry, but there's no record of what the outcome was. The trail just stops, and 3 weeks later, you left Mississippi. Dr. Garrett resigned, and Ruth Johnson disappeared completely." "She didn't disappear," Samuel said quietly. "She died." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with expectation. "I need to know what happened that night, Dr. Morrison. I think the people of Mississippi need to know, especially now, when so much of our history is being erased or forgotten. This hospital treated thousands of black patients during Jim Crow. Their stories matter. Your story matters." Samuel closed his eyes. In his mind, he could see Ruth's face as clearly as if she were standing in front of him. Beautiful, fierce Ruth, with her steady hands and her unwavering conviction that every life was worth saving, regardless of color. Ruth, who had paid the ultimate price for doing what was right. "If I tell you," he said slowly, "you have to understand something. This isn't just history. This is pain. This is rage. This is a story of good people who had to make impossible choices in an impossible time. Are you ready for that, Miss Davis?" "Yes, sir, I am." Samuel looked at the journal on his bed, at the letter from Thomas, still sitting on his kitchen table, at the remnants of a life he'd tried to leave behind. "Then you better come to Oakland," he said, "because this is a story that can't be told over the phone. And Miss Davis, bring a recorder. This doesn't take a while." After he hung up, Samuel returned to the kitchen and carefully cleaned up the broken coffee cup. Then he sat back down at the table and opened the journal to the first page. June 1st, 1963. It read, "Today I became the first Negro resident at Mercy Hospital. Mother would be proud. Father would be worried. I am both." He was going to remember all of it, the good, the bad, and the terrible. For Ruth, if nothing else. The past was coming back, whether he wanted it to or not. Angela Davis arrived 3 days later, carrying a leather bag full of recording equipment and a notebook already half filled with research. Samuel watched from his window as she got out of her rental car, a young woman in her 30s with natural hair and bright eyes that reminded him painfully of Ruth. He'd spent those 3 days preparing, reading through his journal, steeling himself for the memories that would come flooding back. He'd barely slept, his dreams filled with images of Mercy Hospital, of the people he'd saved and the ones he couldn't, of choices made in moments when there was no time to think, only to act. When he opened the door, she smiled warmly and extended her hand. "Dr. Morrison, thank you so much for agreeing to this." Her grip was firm, confident. Samuel nodded and stepped aside to let her in. "Would you like some coffee?" he asked. "Please." They settled in his small living room, the recorder set up on the coffee table between them. Angela waited patiently while Samuel organized his thoughts, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup for warmth despite the California heat outside. "Before we begin," she said gently, "I want you to know that you can stop at any time. If this becomes too difficult, we can take breaks. And if there are things you don't want on the record, just say so." Samuel appreciated her sensitivity, but he knew that once he started, he wouldn't stop until it was all out. Some stories demanded to be told in full or not at all. "No," he said, "if we're doing this, we're doing it right. Everything on the record. The world should know what happened, what was done to us, what we had to do to survive." Angela nodded and pressed record. "It's February 15th, 2026. I'm here with Dr. Samuel Morrison in Oakland, California. Dr. Morrison, can you start by telling me about how you came to work at Mercy Hospital?" Samuel took a deep breath and let himself remember. "I graduated from Howard University Medical School in 1962, top of my class. In those days, that meant absolutely nothing if you were black and wanted to practice in the South. Most hospitals wouldn't even interview us, let alone hire us. But there was a program, a federal initiative meant to integrate medical institutions. Mercy Hospital in Jackson, Mississippi, was required to take on 3 Negro residents to keep their federal funding." He paused, the bitterness still fresh after all these years. "We weren't wanted. We were tolerated. Barely. The 3 of us, me, James Cooper, and David Williams, we knew we were there because the law said we had to be, not because anyone thought we belonged. But we didn't care. We were going to be doctors, and we were going to be the best doctors that hospital had ever seen." "Tell me about your first day," Angela prompted. Samuel's mind drifted back to June of 1963, to the sticky Mississippi heat, and the way his new white coat had felt like armor and a target all at once. The hospital director, Dr. Charles Whitmore, met us in his office. He was a tall man, silver-haired, with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He told us the rules. We were to treat only Negro patients unless specifically instructed otherwise. We were not to use the main doctor's lounge or cafeteria. We had our own separate facilities. We were not to speak to white female nurses unless absolutely necessary for patient care. And under no circumstances were we to question the judgment of white attending physicians. Angela's jaw tightened, but she said nothing, letting him continue. We accepted it because we had to, because being a doctor, even under those conditions, was better than not being a doctor at all, because we knew that our people needed us, needed advocates in a system that was designed to harm them. And Ruth Johnson? When did you meet her? At the mention of her name, Samuel's eyes grew distant. Ruth was there on my first day, in the colored ward. She was a nurse, had been working at Mercy for 5 years by then. She was... He struggled to find the words. She was the strongest person I've ever known. She'd grown up in Jackson, had seen the worst of what segregation could do, and instead of running like so many did, she stayed. She stayed because someone had to look after our people. He stood up slowly, walked to his bookshelf, and pulled down a photograph he'd kept hidden behind other frames for decades. It showed a woman in a nurse's uniform, her smile radiant, her eyes filled with determination. "This is Ruth," he said, showing it to Angela. This was taken in 1964, about a year after I arrived. Angela studied the photograph carefully. "She's beautiful." She was more than that. She was brilliant. If she'd been born white, or even born 20 years later, she would have been a doctor herself. Instead, she was relegated to changing bedpans and following orders from nurses with half her skill and intelligence. Samuel sat back down, the photograph still in his hands. The first time we worked together, really worked together, was about 2 weeks after I arrived. They brought in a young man who'd been in a car accident, both legs broken, internal bleeding, unconscious. The white doctors were all busy with other patients, and Dr. Whitmore told me to stabilize him until someone could take over. "What happened?" I examined him and realized he was bleeding internally from a ruptured spleen. If we waited, he'd die. But I was just a resident, barely a month into my training. I wasn't authorized to operate, especially not without supervision. Ruth was assisting me, and she saw it too. She looked at me and said, "What are you going to do, doctor?" Samuel's voice grew thick with emotion. The way she said doctor, with that much respect, that much expectation, it reminded me why I was there. So I told her to prep him for surgery. She didn't hesitate, didn't question. We had him in the operating room in 15 minutes. "You operated without authorization?" I saved his life. When Dr. Whitmore found out, he was furious, threatened to dismiss me, said I'd overstepped my bounds, that I'd violated protocol. But the patient lived, and his family was grateful, and the hospital couldn't afford a scandal of firing a Negro resident for saving a life. So instead, they made my life hell in 1,000 small ways. Angela leaned forward. "But you stayed." I stayed. We all stayed. Because word got out, you see. Word got out that there were Negro doctors at Mercy who would actually treat Negro patients like human beings. And people started coming. People who'd been turned away from other hospitals. People who couldn't afford private doctors. People who'd been told their pain didn't matter. Samuel's hands tightened around the photograph. The summer of 1964, that's when everything started to change. Freedom Summer, they called it. Hundreds of young people, black and white, coming down to Mississippi to register voters, to challenge Jim Crow, to demand equality. And they were met with violence like you wouldn't believe. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. We saw them all. The ones who were beaten with clubs and chains. The ones who were shot. The ones who disappeared and were found weeks later in rivers and swamps. Mercy Hospital became a battlefield hospital, and we were the medics trying to save the wounded. Did the other doctors help? Samuel's laugh was bitter. Some pretended the injured didn't exist. Others actively sabotaged our efforts. There was one doctor, Dr. Preston, who would accidentally misplace supplies we needed, would schedule the operating rooms, so we couldn't use them when we needed to, would find reasons to pull Negro nurses away from critical patients. That's monstrous. That was Mississippi. That was America. But there were a very few, who were different. Dr. Thomas Garrett was one of them. Angela's eyes lit up with recognition. The man who sent you the letter. Yes, Thomas was from Boston, had come to Mississippi as part of that same federal integration program, but as a white doctor assigned to supervise us. He was supposed to keep us in line, make sure we didn't get too uppity. Instead, he became our greatest ally. Samuel stood again, this time pulling out his journal. He opened it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. Listen to this entry from July 15th, 1964. Dar. Garrett covered for me today when I had to perform an emergency appendectomy on one of the Freedom Riders. Dr. Whitmore was looking for me, wanted to know why I wasn't in rounds. Thomas told him I was updating patient charts in the records room. He knew exactly what I was doing, knew I was in surgery, knew he could get in serious trouble for lying. But he did it anyway. Afterward, he found me and said, "Next time, at least clean the blood off your shoes before you come back upstairs." Then he smiled and walked away. Angela was writing furiously in her notebook. He sounds like an extraordinary man. He is. Thomas believed that medicine was about saving lives, period. Color didn't matter. Politics didn't matter. If someone was hurt, you helped them. Simple as that. It's a philosophy that should have been universal, but was instead radical. Samuel sat back down, his energy flagging. The memories were exhausting, pulling him back into a past that still had the power to wound. Throughout that summer and into the fall, the three of us, me, Ruth, and Thomas, we formed our own little resistance movement within the hospital. We treated the people others wouldn't. We falsified records to protect activists from the police. We smuggled medical supplies to clinics in the black community. We became a lifeline for people who had nowhere else to turn. Weren't you afraid? The question hung in the air. Terrified, Samuel admitted, every single day. We all received threats. Someone spray painted the N-word across my car. Ruth's apartment was broken into, her belongings destroyed. Thomas got letters telling him he was a race traitor and worse. But we kept going because the alternative was letting people die, and we couldn't do that. We wouldn't. He paused, his eyes distant. And then came September 1965, the month everything fell apart. Angela leaned forward, sensing they were approaching the heart of the story. What happened in September? Samuel's hands began to shake again. He set down his coffee cup before he could drop it. That's when they brought him in, he said quietly. That's when everything changed. Who? Samuel looked at Angela, and she saw in his eyes a pain that had never healed. Patient unknown, he said. That's what the file says, right? Patient unknown. But he had a name. He was a person. He was just a boy. Tell me about him. Samuel closed his eyes. It was September 17th, 1965. I was on night shift. Ruth was with me. It was late, maybe 2 in the morning, when we heard someone pounding on the emergency room door. We weren't supposed to answer after hours without security present, but the pounding was desperate, so we opened it. His voice cracked. There was a woman, maybe 40 years old, holding a boy in her arms. He couldn't have been more than 16. She was crying, begging us to help him. The boy was unconscious, his face swollen beyond recognition, blood everywhere. Angela's pen had stopped moving. She was completely still, listening. We got him inside, got him on a gurney. Ruth went to call for the attending physician, while I tried to assess his injuries. Multiple skull fractures, broken ribs, internal bleeding. He'd been beaten within an inch of his life. Samuel's eyes opened, focusing on something Angela couldn't see. The woman who brought him in, she was terrified. She kept saying, "Please don't tell anyone he's here. Please. They'll kill him. They'll kill us all." I asked her who did this to him, and she just shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Did you find out?" "Oh, we found out," Samuel said, his voice hardening. Because 20 minutes later, while we were still trying to stabilize him, 3 police officers walked into that emergency room like they owned the place. And maybe they did. This was Mississippi. The police could do whatever they wanted to black folks and call it justice. He stood again, unable to sit still with a memory. The lead officer was a man named Garrett, no relation to Thomas. Thank God. Officer Garrett was known throughout the black community as one of the worst, a man who took pleasure in violence, who saw beating black people as his God-given right. Samuel's hands clenched into fists. He looked at that boy on the gurney, looked at me and smiled, actually smiled. Then he said, "That one's a fugitive. We need to take him into custody." "What did you do?" "I did what I've been trained not to do. I said no." The word hung in the air like a challenge, like a declaration of war. Samuel could still remember the shock on Officer Garrett's face, the way his smile had frozen, and then twisted into something ugly and dangerous. In 1965, Mississippi, black people didn't say no to white police officers, not if they wanted to live. I told him the patient was in critical condition. Samuel continued, his voice steady now despite the trembling in his hands. I said that moving him could kill him, that he needed immediate surgery. I cited hospital protocol, federal law, medical ethics. I threw everything I could think of at him. And he laughed. He actually laughed. Then he said, "Boy, I don't care what some fancy medical school taught you. This here is a criminal, and criminals don't get to decide when they go to jail." Samuel walked to the window, looking out at the Oakland street below, seeing instead the emergency room at Mercy Hospital all those years ago. That's when Ruth came back with Dr. Whitmore. I've never been so relieved to see that man in my life. I thought, surely, even Whitmore wouldn't let the police take a patient who was barely alive. I thought the one thing we could count on was that doctors protected their patients. The bitterness in his voice was palpable. I was wrong. Angela waited, letting him tell it in his own time. Dr. Whitmore looked at the boy, looked at the police officers, and said, "Officer Garrett, if you can wait 30 minutes for us to stabilize him, he's all yours." Just like that. Like that boy's life meant nothing. Like our oaths as doctors meant nothing. What about the mother? What happened to her? Samuel's face darkened. She tried to stop them. She threw herself between the gurney and the officers, begging, pleading. Officer Garrett shoved her so hard she hit the wall. She was crying, saying, "That's my son, that's my baby, please." And Whitmore just stood there and watched. The rage that Samuel had carried for 60 years filled the room like a physical presence. Angela could feel it, heavy and hot and righteous. Ruth helped the woman up, took her to the waiting area. I could see the fury in Ruth's eyes, the same fury I felt. But what could we do? We were powerless. We were black folks in Mississippi, and the police were the police, and Dr. Whitmore had made his decision. But you didn't accept it, Angela said softly. Samuel turned to look at her. No, he said. We didn't accept it. He returned to his chair, picked up his journal, found the page he was looking for. This is what I wrote that night. His name is Michael Johnson. He's 16 years old. He likes to draw, according to his mother. He wants to be an artist. He participated in a voter registration drive last week. For this crime, he was beaten nearly to death. For this crime, he will be taken to jail where he will likely die. For this crime, his mother will lose her son, and I am supposed to stand by and let it happen. I am supposed to be a good, quiet Negro and know my place. Samuel's voice broke. I couldn't do it, Angela. I couldn't let that boy die. What did you do? I went to find Thomas. He was sleeping in the doctor's lounge, having worked a double shift. I woke him up and told him everything. And you know what he said? He said, "We're not giving them that boy." A ghost of a smile crossed Samuel's face. We came up with a plan. It was desperate, probably illegal, definitely career-ending. But we didn't care. Thomas went to talk to Officer Garrett, told him some story about needing to run additional tests, about potential liability if the patient died in custody without proper medical clearance. He used big words, medical jargon, bureaucratic double talk. Bought us time. While you did what? While Ruth and I operated. Samuel leaned back, the memories washing over him. We took Michael to the surgical suite in the colored wing, the one that wasn't as well equipped but was away from the main hospital. Ruth prepped him while I scrubbed in. I'd never performed neurosurgery before, not as a lead surgeon. But Michael had a subdural hematoma, bleeding in his brain, and if we didn't relieve the pressure, he'd die. You operated without supervision, without authorization, with the police waiting downstairs to arrest your patient? Yes. The simple affirmation carried the weight of everything that decision had meant. Ruth was my surgical nurse. She was magnificent, Angela, absolutely magnificent. Her hands were steady when mine shook. She anticipated every instrument I needed before I asked for it. She monitored his vitals, adjusted the anesthesia, whispered encouragement when I thought I couldn't do it. Samuel's eyes grew distant. The surgery took 4 hours. 4 hours during which Thomas had to keep Officer Garrett and Dr. Whitmore occupied, had to lie and stall and improvise. For hours during which one slip of my scalpel could have killed Michael. For hours during which we all knew that if we were caught, our careers were over and we might face criminal charges ourselves. But you save him. We save his life, Samuel confirmed. When we finished, when we closed him up and moved him to recovery, all three of us just stood there in that operating room, exhausted and terrified and exhilarated. We'd done it. We'd actually done it. Angela was writing again, her hand moving rapidly across the page. What happened next? Samuel's expression hardened. Then we had to figure out what to do with a 16-year-old boy with a shaved head and fresh surgical scars who was wanted by the police and would be killed if he was found. You hid him. We hid him in the colored ward, in a room at the end of the hall that was supposed to be for storage. We falsified the admission records, listed him as John Smith, a farm accident victim. Ruth called her cousin who worked with the NAACP, told him we needed to get someone out of Mississippi fast. Samuel stood again, too agitated to sit still. For 3 days we kept Michael hidden. Ruth brought him food, changed his bandages, sat with him when he woke up confused and scared. I checked on him between my regular rounds, always looking over my shoulder, always terrified we'd be discovered. Thomas ran interference with the hospital administration, filed fake reports, misdirected inquiries. And Officer Garrett, what did he do? He was furious, convinced we'd done something, but couldn't prove it. He came back to the hospital multiple times, demanded to search the wards. But Dr. Whitmore ironically protected us, not out of any sense of justice, but because he didn't want a scandal of police officers ransacking his hospital. Samuel's laugh was hollow. On the third night, Ruth's NAACP contacts got Michael out. They came in the middle of the night, dressed him in street clothes, carried him out through the basement exit, put him in a car, and drove him north. We heard later that he made it to Chicago, that he recovered, that he lived. That's incredible, Angela breathed. That's not the end of the story. The way Samuel said it made Angela's blood run cold. What happened? Samuel sat down heavily, suddenly looking everyone as 82 years. We thought we'd gotten away with it. We thought the danger had passed. We were wrong. He closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Someone talked. We never found out who, but someone told Officer Garrett what we'd done, and he decided to make an example of us. Angela's pen had stopped moving again. She was frozen, dreading what was coming next. September 25th, 1965, 8 days after Michael came in. I was at home, getting ready for my night shift, when someone knocked on my door. It was Ruth's neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. She was hysterical, could barely get the words out. Samuel's hands gripped the arms of his chair. Ruth's apartment was on fire. The fire department was there, but they were moving slow, too slow. Mrs. Patterson said she'd seen men running from a building right before the fire started. She said she'd heard Ruth screaming. The room was absolutely silent except for the software of the recorder. I ran 6 blocks to Ruth's apartment building. By the time I got there, the fire was already spreading to other units. People were evacuating, standing in the street in their night clothes. But Ruth wasn't among them. A tear rolled down Samuel's weathered cheek. The firemen wouldn't go in, said it was too dangerous, that the building was going to collapse. I tried to push past them, tried to get inside, but they held me back. I was screaming her name, fighting to get free, and all the while I could see the flames consuming that building, consuming everything. Did she make it out? Samuel shook his head slowly. They found her body 2 days later, after the fire had burned itself out. She tried to escape through her bedroom window, but had been overcome by smoke. The official report called it an accident, faulty wiring. But we all knew it was murder. Angela's own tears were flowing now, her professional detachment shattered by the raw pain in Samuel's voice. Ruth Johnson was 28 years old, Samuel continued. She dedicated her life to helping people, to fighting for justice, to standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. And she died for it. She died because she chose to save a boy's life instead of letting him be murdered by men who were supposed to protect and serve. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, wiped his eyes. The funeral was 3 days later. The entire black community came out. Hundreds of people, all of them knowing that Ruth had been killed, all of them powerless to do anything about it. Officer Garrett was there too, standing in the back in his uniform, smiling. The rage in Samuel's voice could have melted steel. I wanted to kill him. I wanted to walk over to that smiling monster and kill him with my bare hands. Thomas had to hold me back, had to remind me that Ruth wouldn't want to throw my life away, that the best revenge was to keep doing what we've been doing, to keep fighting. What did you do? I stayed for the funeral. I stood there and watched them lower Ruth Johnson into the ground, watched her mother collapse with grief, watched her father stand there with tears streaming down his face and his hands clenched into fists. And I made a promise. Samuel looked directly at Angela. I promised Ruth that I would never stop fighting, that I would never let her death be in vain, that I would spend the rest of my life making sure that black lives mattered, that black patients got the care they deserve, that no one would ever again have to die because of the color of their skin. Is that why you left Mississippi? Partly. The hospital launched an investigation into what happened with Michael Johnson. They couldn't prove anything, but they made it clear that our presence was no longer welcome. Thomas resigned in protest. I was told that my residency contract wouldn't be renewed. We left within a month, both of us, scattered to different parts of the country. Samuel's voice grew softer. I went to Oakland. There was a clinic there serving the black community, understaffed and underfunded. They needed doctors who were willing to work for almost nothing, who understood the particular challenges facing black patients, who wouldn't judge or discriminate. I worked there for 40 years, until I retired. And Thomas went to Atlanta, started a free clinic, focused on civil rights workers who'd been injured or traumatized. We kept in touch over the years, letters mostly. Neither of us ever went back to Mississippi. Neither of us could face it. Samuel picked up the letter from Thomas, the one that had started all of this. Until now. He handed it to Angela. "There's something still buried there that belongs to you," she read aloud. "What does he mean?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "There's a box," he finally said. "Ruth and I, we kept records. Every patient we treated in secret, every freedom rider we helped, every life we saved. We documented it all, names and dates and details. We wanted someone to know, someday, what had happened, what had been done to our people. Where is it? Hidden in the hospital, in the colored ward, in the wall of that storage room where we kept Michael. We made a space behind a loose brick, put the box inside, sealed it up. We figured if anything happened to us, someone would find it eventually." Angela's eyes widened. "And it's still there?" "According to Thomas, yes. He went back, did some checking. The hospital has been closed for years, but the building is still standing. They're planning to demolish it next month. And if they do, that box will be lost forever. We have to get it," Angela said immediately. "I'm 82 years old," Samuel reminded her gently. "I don't think I can make that trip." "Then I'll go. I'll go to Mississippi. I'll find that box, and I'll make sure the world knows what happened. What you did, what Ruth did, what all of you did." Samuel studied her carefully. "Why does this matter so much to you, Miss Davis? This is ancient history to most people." Angela set down her pen. "My grandmother was a freedom rider," she said quietly. "Summer of 1964. She was beaten by police in Jackson and ended up at Mercy Hospital. She told me once that a Negro doctor and a nurse saved her life, treated her when no one else would. She never knew their names, but she never forgot what they did for her." Samuel's breath caught. "What was your grandmother's name?" "Catherine Davis. She was 18 years old." Samuel stood abruptly, went to his bookshelf, and pulled down the photograph he'd shown Angela earlier. But this time he turned it over. On the back, in Ruth's handwriting, was a list of names. "Catherine Davis, age 18, fractured skull and broken arm. Treated August 7th, 1964. Samuel read. "Ruth kept a copy of our records with her, just in case." Angela stood too, tears streaming down her face. "She never told me the doctor's name. She said they wouldn't tell her, that it was too dangerous. But she said the nurse told her to stay strong, that what they were fighting for mattered, that change was coming." "That sounds like Ruth," Samuel said, his own voice thick with emotion. The two of them stood there, separated by generations but connected by a shared history of pain and resistance and hope. "I'll go to Mississippi," Angela said again. "I'll get that box. And I'll make sure everyone knows what happened. I'll make sure Ruth Johnson's name is remembered." Samuel nodded slowly. "There's something else you should know," he said. "Something I haven't told anyone in 60 years. He went back to his journal, opened it to a page near the end. "This is my last entry before I left Mississippi. September 30th, 1965. He read aloud, "Ruth is dead. Thomas is leaving. I am leaving. Everything we built, everything we fought for, it feels like it's crumbling. But I can't give up. I won't give up. Because Ruth didn't die for nothing. She died believing that change was possible, that justice would come, that one day black people would be treated as equals in this country. I have to believe that too. I have to keep fighting, keep working, keep saving lives. It's what she would want. It's what I owe her." Samuel closed the journal. "But there's one more thing. The night of the fire, before I knew what had happened, Ruth came to see me. It was late, maybe 10 p.m. She was scared, said she thought someone was following her. She'd received threats, phone calls in the middle of the night. She knew she was in danger. What did she say? She gave me something. A letter sealed in an envelope. She told me not to open it unless something happened to her. If she was arrested, if she disappeared, if anything went wrong, I was supposed to read it. Angela leaned forward. Did you read it? Not until after the funeral. I couldn't bring myself to open it while she was alive. Part of me thought that if I didn't open it, she'd be okay. Magical thinking, I know. What did it say? Samuel walked to his bedroom, to the box where he kept his journal and photographs. From the very bottom, he pulled out a yellowed envelope, the seal broken decades ago. She wrote the day after we got Michael out. She must have known, even then, that there would be consequences. He handed the envelope to Angela. Read it aloud, he said. Please. Angela carefully pulled out the letter inside. The paper was fragile, the ink faded but still legible. She cleared her throat and began to read. Dear Samuel, if you're reading this, then I guess my luck ran out. I always knew it might come to this. When you choose to stand up in Mississippi, when you choose to fight back, you know what the risks are. But I wanted you to know that I don't regret it. Not for 1 second. These past 2 years, working with you and Thomas, they've been the most meaningful of my life. Every life we saved, every person we helped, every small victory against an unjust system, it mattered. It all mattered. I grew up watching black folks die from treatable conditions because white doctors wouldn't touch them. I watched my own brother die of appendicitis because the hospital turned him away. I became a nurse so that I could do something, anything, to change that. And then you came along, you and your pride and your skill, and your refusal to accept the way things were. You showed me that resistance was possible, that we didn't have to accept injustice just because it was the norm, that black lives mattered, even in Mississippi, even in 1965. If I'm gone, I need you to promise me something. Promise me you'll keep fighting. Promise me you'll keep saving lives. Promise me you won't let the hatred and violence break you. Because, Samuel, you are going to be a great doctor. You already are. The world needs you. And promise me one more thing. Promise me that someday, when it's safe, you'll tell the truth about what happened here, about the people we saved, the battles we fought, the price we paid. Don't let our story be forgotten. Don't let our people be forgotten. There's going to be a reckoning in this country, Samuel. Maybe not in our lifetime, but someday. And when it comes, I want our story to be part of it. I want people to know that we fought back, that we didn't just accept what they did to us. I want them to know that Ruth Johnson was here, and she mattered. Thank you for everything. Thank you for being my friend, my colleague, my brother in this fight. Thank you for seeing me as more than just a nurse, more than just a Negro woman who didn't know her place. Thank you for believing with me that we could change things. Keep fighting, Samuel, for both of us. With love and respect, Ruth. By the time Angela finished reading, both she and Samuel were openly crying. She knew, Samuel said. She knew what was going to happen, and she went home anyway. She could have run, could have left town, but she went home because running would have meant accepting defeat. She was extraordinary, Angela said. She was, Samuel agreed, and the world barely knows she existed. Angela carefully folded the letter and handed it back to Samuel. That's going to change, she said with fierce determination. I'm going to Mississippi. I'm going to find that box. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows what Ruth Johnson did, what you did, what Thomas did. This story is going to be told. Samuel looked at this young woman, saw in her the same fire that had driven Ruth, the same refusal to accept injustice. When are you leaving? Tomorrow, if I can get a flight. Then there's something I need to give you. Samuel went back to his box of memories and pulled out a key, small and brass, worn smooth by time. This is the key to the storage room. I kept it all these years. I don't know why. Maybe I always knew I'd need it again someday. He handed it to Angela. The brick is 3 rows up on the floor, 4th from the left on the east wall. You'll need a screwdriver or something to pry it loose. Angela took the key, closed her hand around it. I won't let you down, she promised. I know you won't, Samuel said. You remind me of her, you know, Ruth. That same determination, that same belief that the truth matters. They stood together in the quiet apartment, the weight of history and memory between them, the promise of revelation ahead. "There's one more thing," Samuel said. "Thomas. He should be there too. He deserves to see what we had all those years ago. Do you have his contact information?" Samuel smiled. "He's the one who sent me the letter, remember? He's already in Mississippi. Been there for a week. He told me on the phone yesterday. He's been going through old hospital records, trying to piece together what happened to all the patients we treated. Then I'll call him when I land. We'll do this together." Samuel nodded. "Together?" he repeated. "That's how we did everything back then. Me and Ruth and Thomas. Together?" After Angela left, promising to call as soon as she arrived in Mississippi, Samuel sat alone in his apartment. He picked up the photograph of Ruth, studied her smile, her eyes, the strength visible even in a faded image. "They're going to know your name, Ruth," he said quietly. "They're going to know what you did. I kept my promise. I kept fighting. And now your story is going to be told." He placed the photograph on his mantle in a position of honor where he could see it from anywhere in the room. Outside, the sun was setting over Oakland, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Samuel stood at his window, watching the light fade, thinking about the past and the future, about what had been lost and what might yet be redeemed. His hands had stopped shaking. Angela's plane touched down in Jackson, Mississippi on a humid February afternoon. The city had changed since the 1960s, grown and modernized, but there were still echoes of the past visible in certain neighborhoods, certain buildings, certain faces. She picked up her rental car and drove straight to the address Thomas had given her over the phone. He was staying in a small hotel near the old hospital, preparing for the demolition that was scheduled to begin in just 2 weeks. When she knocked on his door, it opened to reveal a man in his mid-80s, tall and still straight-backed, with kind eyes and gentle hands. He smiled when he saw her. "You must be Angela. Samuel called to tell me you were coming." "Dr. Garrett?" "Just Thomas, please. I stopped being Dr. Garrett when I left the state 60 years ago." He invited her in, and Angela saw that his hotel room had been transformed into a makeshift research center. Papers covered every surface, old hospital records, newspaper clippings, photographs. "I've been trying to document as much as I can before the building comes down," Thomas explained. "There's so much history here, so many stories that were never told." Angela showed him the key Samuel had given her. He said you'd know where to find the box. Thomas held the key carefully, as if it might break. "I haven't been inside the hospital yet," he admitted. "I've been working up the courage. So many memories in that place. Not all of them good. I can go alone if you prefer." "No," Thomas said firmly. "This is something we need to do together. All three of us, in a way. Me, you, and Samuel Spirit here with us." They made plans to enter the hospital the next morning, when the light would be better. That evening, over dinner at a small restaurant that served soul food, Thomas told Angela his side of the story. "I grew up in Boston," he began, "in a family that believed in justice and equality. My father was a lawyer who defended civil rights cases pro bono. My mother taught at an integrated school. I was raised to believe that all people were equal, that racism was a moral cancer that needed to be cut out." He paused to take a sip of sweet tea. "When I finished medical school, I could have gone anywhere, could have had a comfortable practice in Boston or New York. But my father asked me to consider the South. He said that's what a fight was. That's where doctors with my beliefs were needed most. So you volunteered for the integration program?" "I did. And I was sent to Mercy Hospital with the explicit mandate to supervise the Negro residents, to make sure they didn't cause trouble. The assumption was that I would be on the side of the white establishment, that I would help maintain the status quo." Thomas smiled ruefully. "They picked the wrong person for that job. What changed your mind? Or were you always planning to help?" "I went in with good intentions, but honestly didn't know what to expect. Then I met Samuel on his first day. He was brilliant, absolutely brilliant, but he was also angry, rightfully angry. He'd worked twice as hard as every white student in medical school and was still being treated as inferior." Thomas's expression grew serious. "The first week, I watched as Dr. Whitmore and the other white physicians systematically undermined Samuel and the other black residents. They were given worse assignments, denied access to learning opportunities, criticized for the slightest mistakes, while white residents' errors were overlooked. It was cruel and it was deliberate. That must have been difficult to witness. It was infuriating. But what really opened my eyes was watching Samuel with patience. He treated every single person, regardless of color, with dignity and compassion. He took time to explain diagnoses, to comfort worried families, to go above and beyond what was required. He was the kind of doctor I wanted to be. Thomas looked out the window at the Jackson Street, remembering. And Ruth, she was the conscience of that hospital. She'd worked there longer than any of us, had seen the worst of what racism in medicine could do, but she never became bitter or defeated. She just kept fighting, kept advocating for her patients, kept pushing for change. Samuel told me about the night Michael Johnson came in. Thomas's face darkened. That was the night I had to decide who I really was. Was I a doctor first, or was I a white man first? Was I going to protect my career and my safety, or was I going to do what was right? You chose what was right. I chose to be a doctor, Thomas corrected gently. That's all any of us did. We chose to honor our oaths, to save lives, to fight for our patients. The fact that it was considered radical, that it put us in danger, that says everything about how broken the system was. Angela listened, recording everything, knowing that Thomas's perspective was a crucial part of the story. Tell me about the night Ruth died. Thomas's hands clenched around his glass. I was at the hospital when Samuel got the news. I'll never forget the sound he made, this raw, agonizing cry. I ran to find him, and he was on the floor, just completely broken. We both knew it wasn't an accident. We both knew she'd been murdered for what we did. Did you try to get justice for her? Thomas laughed bitterly. Justice? In Mississippi in 1965, we reported our suspicions to the police, and they laughed at us. We tried to get the FBI involved, but they said there was no evidence of foul play. The fire marshal ruled it an accident, case closed. He set down his glass. That's when I knew we had to leave. Samuel wanted to stay, wanted to keep fighting, but I convinced him that we'd be more useful alive than dead. And make no mistake, if we'd stayed, they would have killed us too. Do you regret leaving? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Every day, he finally said. Every single day, I wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed. Could we have saved more lives? Could we have made more of a difference? Could we have brought Ruth's killers to justice? He looked directly at Angela. But I also know that leaving allowed us to continue to work. I spent 40 years running a clinic in Atlanta, treating people who couldn't afford care elsewhere, training a new generation of doctors who believed in justice and equality. Samuel did the same in Oakland. Maybe we had more impact over those 40 years than we could have had if we'd stayed in Mississippi and been killed. Samuel said you've been going through the hospital records. What have you found? Thomas stood and walked to the piles of papers on his desk. Evidence, he said simply. Evidence of everything we did, everything that was done to black patients, everything that was hidden or ignored or swept under the rug. He picked up a file. This is the record of a woman named Dorothy Williams. She came to Mercy in June 1964 with a difficult pregnancy. She was turned away by 3 white doctors who said they didn't have time for her. She went into labor in the waiting room. Ruth and Samuel delivered her baby on the floor of the colored waiting room, while white doctors walked past and did nothing. He picked up another file. James Wilson, age 22, shot by police during a peaceful protest. Brought to Mercy with a bullet in his spine. Dr. Whitmore said the surgery was too risky, that he'd likely die or be paralyzed anyway. Samuel operated while I ran interference. James walked out of that hospital 6 weeks later. File after file, story after story, a litany of injustice and resistance. I've documented 53 cases where black patients were denied care or given substandard treatment, Thomas said. And I've documented 37 cases where Samuel, Ruth, and I intervened to save lives that were deemed not worth saving. Angela felt the weight of it, the enormity of what had been done and what had been hidden. This needs to be published, she said. All of it, the full story. That's why I'm here, Thomas agreed. That's why I contacted Samuel. The hospital is coming down, and with it, the last physical evidence of what happened. But we have a chance to preserve the truth, to make sure these stories aren't forgotten. They sat in silence for a moment, the magnitude of their mission settling over them. Tomorrow, Angela said, we get the box, and then we tell the world. Thomas nodded. For Ruth, he said. For Ruth, Angela agreed. The next morning dawned gray and misty. Angela and Thomas drove to Mercy Hospital, pulling up in front of a building that looked like a ghost. The windows were boarded up, the paint peeling, the grounds overgrown with weeds. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, with signs warning that the building was condemned and scheduled for demolition. It's smaller than I remembered, Thomas said quietly. Buildings usually are. They found a gap in the fence and made their way to the back entrance, the one that led to the colored ward. Thomas had brought bolt cutters for the chains on the door, and after a few minutes of work, they were inside. The smell hit them first, musty and damp, the scent of decades of abandonment. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating walls that had once been white, but were now stained with water damage and mold. This way, Thomas said, his voice echoing in the empty hallway. They walked through corridors that had once been filled with patients and doctors and nurses. Angela could almost hear the ghosts of conversations, the sounds of suffering and healing, the footsteps of people long dead. Thomas stopped in front of a door at the end of a hallway. This is it, he said. The storage room. Angela handed him the key. His hands shook as he fitted it into the lock, but it still worked. The door swung open with a creak. Inside was a small room, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, filled with abandoned equipment and old furniture. But Thomas walked directly to the east wall, counting bricks. 3 rows up, 4th from the left, he murmured. He knelt down, his old knees protesting, and pressed on the brick. It shifted slightly. Angela, I need something to pry with. She handed him a flathead screwdriver she'd brought. Thomas worked the brick loose, wiggling it back and forth until it finally came free. Behind it was a space, dark and hollow, and inside that space was a metal box, dusty but intact. Thomas reached in with trembling hands and pulled it out. It was about the size of a shoebox, sealed with a combination lock. Do you know the combination? Angela asked. Thomas smiled. Ruth's birthday, March 15th, 1937, 3:15:37. He dialed in the numbers. The lock clicked open. Inside were papers, dozens of them, neatly organized and labeled in Ruth's careful handwriting. Patient names, dates, treatments, outcomes. Everything they'd done, documented in meticulous detail. And on top of everything was a photograph. The 3 of them, Samuel, Ruth, and Thomas, standing in front of Mercy Hospital. They looked so young, so hopeful, so determined. On the back of the photograph, in Ruth's handwriting, was a note. To whoever finds this, we were here. We mattered. We fought. Tell our story. Thomas clutched the photograph to his chest, tears streaming down his face. We found it, Ruth, he whispered. We found it, and we're going to tell everyone what you did. Angela was crying too, overwhelmed by the weight of history, by the courage of these 3 people who had risked everything for what was right. They spent the next hour going through the box, carefully examining each document, each record, each piece of evidence. It was all there, the complete story of their resistance, preserved for 60 years in a wall in a forgotten hospital. We need to get this somewhere safe, Angela said, and we need to start telling the story. Thomas nodded, carefully repacking the box. I want to call Samuel first. He deserves to know we found it. They made their way back out of the hospital, back to the car, back to the hotel. Angela set up her recording equipment, while Thomas called Samuel on speakerphone. Thomas. Samuel's voice came through, anxious and hopeful. We found it, Sam. We found the box. There was a long silence, then the sound of Samuel crying. Thank God, he finally said. Thank God. Everything's here, Sam. All of Ruth's records, all our documentation. Even that photograph she took of the 3 of us. The one where you're making that ridiculous face? Thomas laughed through his tears. That's the one. I wish I could be there with you. You are, Thomas said firmly. You're here in every page of these records, in every life we saved, in every choice we made. This is your story as much as it's mine or Ruth's. Angela spoke up. Dr. Morrison, I'm going to make sure everyone knows what happened. I'm going to write the definitive account of what you three did at Mercy Hospital. Your story, Ruth's story, all the patients you saved. It's all going to be told. What about the people who don't want it told? Samuel asked. There are still folks alive who are part of what happened, who have reputations to protect. Let them try to stop us, Angela said fiercely. The truth is the truth, and it's time for it to come out. They talked for another hour, Samuel sharing more memories, Thomas adding details, Angela recording everything. By the time they hung up, they had the skeleton of a story that would shake Mississippi to its core. That evening, Angela began writing. She wrote about Samuel's arrival at Mercy, about Ruth's determination, about Thomas's courage. She wrote about Michael Johnson and the night that changed everything. She wrote about the fire that killed Ruth, about the cover-up, about the decades of silence. And she wrote about the box, hidden in a wall, waiting to be found, waiting to reveal the truth. 3 days later, the first article appeared in the Mississippi Observer. The headline read, The Hidden Heroes of Mercy Hospital, How 3 Medical Professionals Risked Everything to Save Black Lives During Jim Crow. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Some people were angry, claimed the story was exaggerated or false, that it was an attack on Mississippi's heritage. But many more were moved, grateful that the truth was finally being told. The national media picked it up. NPR, the New York Times, the Washington Post. Everyone wanted to interview Samuel and Thomas, to hear their stories in their own words, to understand what it had been like to practice medicine in a system designed to value white lives over black ones. Samuel, at 82, became something of celebrity. He appeared on television, spoke at universities, was honored by medical associations. But he always insisted that the focus should be on Ruth. She's the one who paid the ultimate price. He said in every interview, she's the one who deserves to be remembered. A movement began to rename a street in Jackson after Ruth Johnson, to erect a memorial to the black patients who had suffered and died under Jim Crow medical practices, to teach this history in schools so that future generations would know what had happened. And through it all, Angela kept writing, kept documenting, kept interviewing people who remembered that era, who had been patients at Mercy, who had stories to tell. 2 months after the article was published, she got a call from an unexpected source. Miss Davis, my name is Michael Johnson. Angela's heart stopped. The Michael Johnson? Yes, ma'am. I read your articles about Mercy Hospital, about Dr. Morrison and Nurse Johnson and Dr. Garrett, about what they did for me. You're alive, Angela breathed. I'm alive because of them. I've been living in Chicago for 60 years, built a life, had a family. I have grandchildren now, and none of it would have been possible if they hadn't saved me. Would you be willing to tell your story?